Welcome to Warrior Money, the show devoted to supporting our brother and sister veterans in business. I'm Patrick Murphy.
And I'm Dan Kunze.
Today's guest is a certified financial planner with over 24 years in the financial industry. As a senior portfolio manager and shareholder at FBB Capital Partners, she specializes in guiding families, high net worth individuals, and foundations toward their financial goals. But prior to joining FBB, she spent 12 years at Charles Schwab and Company. Additionally, she's a military spouse, married to a retired Marine Corps colonel. Please welcome Maggi Keating. Maggi, welcome to Warrior Money.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
All right, Maggi, our first question from the thing is bluff, bottom line up front. I read your phenomenal piece for MOA, the Military Officers Association of America piece about why certain seniors should wait to take Social Security until they're age 67. Why is that important?
Well, if you take it earlier than 67, 67 is for most birth years, considered your full retirement age. And that's when you get the best benefit. If you take it before then, you get a reduced benefit, and that will be reduced permanently for your entire lifespan. And so if you take it at 67 or even beyond, then you're guaranteeing 67 through 70, you're guaranteeing yourself more money for every year that you can wait.
Yeah, I learned a lot from reading. I've read it on your LinkedIn, and what Dan and I talk about is plan your work and work your plan. And so when he talks about financial advice, going to someone like you who's a financial advisor, and not someone who's just trying to day trade, but having a plan. I had no idea that if you wait till a lot of people take it at 62, that if you wait to 67, you can go from like $2,000 a month to $2,500 a month. That's another over $5,000 in your pocket. So that was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's a marked difference for sure.
Yeah, in our intros, we talked about you being a military spouse and you have a retired colonel for a husband. How long did he serve for, and what was his service like?
He was in for 27 years. So we got married when he was on the OSO out of Baltimore, and he always jokes that he couldn't recruit me, so he married me.
Smart. Good decision.
And we moved out to San Diego. I worked for Schwab at the time, as you saw. He was an artillery officer, so we went through Oklahoma. And I don't think the business model would work today, but I was employed the whole time by Schwab. I was able to transfer to the Oklahoma City office, to Carlsbad, California, to the Monterey office when he was, or Carmel Valley, actually, when he was at Naval Postgraduate School. So we were, I was very fortunate that way.
Yeah, you are. We talk a lot about military spouses right now and the challenges that they face with transferability of their jobs and like their skill sets. And to be a nurse in one place and to be a teacher in another place is very, very difficult. So when you were as a military spouse and you were working through raising two beautiful kids and having a husband that was in the military for 27 years, how did you find yourself relevant, and how did you find yourself a purpose within the work that you were trying to do?
As I said, I was very fortunate to be able to transfer from office to office. And because of, I actually ended up working with some of the same people in various offices through my Schwab career in different parts of the country, which was, one of those crazy small world things. But it just continual, probably one of the pieces I picked up from the military, the continual lifelong learning. And I was able to get additional licenses as I went along, and became, not only got my Series 8, Series 7, which I came into Schwab with, but my Series 8, which was a managerial thing, and made me a more integral part of Schwab, and then got my certified financial planning certification, and moved me into Schwab Private Client. And so all of those pieces kept increasing my skill set, and therefore my transferability factor as I went along in my career.
Maggi, you talked about transferability, and that's incredibly important, especially because every 3-4 years, we in the military, we have like a PCS, a permanent change of station. How about, I read an article on your FBB site about the fact that if you have a 401k plan, and if you have a bunch of them, how you can potentially consolidate them. Is that some of the things that you offer to some of your clients?
Absolutely, yeah, to, be able to harness those, past employer plans that you can put them together because it's the law of big numbers. You have, first of all, it's easier to track your investments when they're all together and you're, and able to keep them growing, and then later on, when, you're mandated to take distributions from it, to be able to have everything in one place, that just makes it that much easier for you to make sure that you've taken the amount you're supposed to take, and, and also evaluating if it's a good time to convert a traditional IRA to a Roth is another thing that when you have everything together and visibility of all your accounts in one place or in one account makes it that much easier to do the modeling.
Yeah, I was really close with my grandfather, and he passed away about 8 years ago. And as he was getting closer and closer to passing away, he was an Army veteran, by the way. So this is an appropriate commentary, appropriate seg. He had money in so many different places that it was hard to know where his money was, especially as he was starting to lose his wherewithal, especially as he was starting to lose his understanding of where he was going. And I feel very strongly about our protections for elders and our protections for elders' kind of financial abuse, essentially. And I know that there's some red flags. And in my grandpop's case, it was like he didn't always know where his money was, and then he had advisors that gave him a very conflicting opinion. So I'd love to hear what you think about some of the red flags in that area and how some of your advice can support them.
As in regard to the elderly specifically.
Yeah, yeah, kind of how good advice and how good support can help them through their maturation.
Yeah, well, we are very concerned. A lot of our clients are elderly. They come to us as they're retiring. So it's something that we discuss often as a firm. And one of the things we do when they're retaining us is we have them sign a trusted contact agreement. So we have either a family member or a friend that we can reach out to if we're concerned. We see a difference in their spending or a difference in just their understanding of when we have conversations with them about their money. So that's one thing. We also make sure that we're having regular ongoing conversations with them so we can get a gauge of how plugged in they are with their finances. If they start taking unusual deposits, we always make sure that we check in and we try to meet with them in person so that we get a real feel of how they're doing.
Yeah, and that's important, especially because when you look at, we're from Pennsylvania, right? And it's one of the oldest states in the country. But when you look at how seniors are prided upon, especially when you look at cybersecurity, right? That digital information is incredibly important, and how they can be abused with a click of the wrong link on an email or text that they might get.
Yeah, we also just take extra steps. If there's a money transfer, 10,000 or above, we make sure we call them, even if it's something that's going to the bank we have on file, just because of these, so many online scams these days. And, all people, but especially seniors being vulnerable to phishing attacks and, really any kind of incidents online. We want to make sure that, anything they've done online is truly them. So, we try to take that extra step to make sure that everything's above board.
Yeah, part of the discipline that's required to be what we think to be good investors also requires you to follow a strategy. And with all the noise in the news these days, I really am interested in your perspective on like how do veterans how can veterans best benefit from investment decisions? How does their strategic decision making help support them as good investors? And how do they find their way through the noise?
Well, I think you probably have to go back to your training, right? Where it's like the rigorous training and non-emotional decision making. And I think you're right. It is a lot of noise and focusing on the long battle plan and to, so to speak, and look at why you bought the companies in the first place and to focus on um, that plan, and part of our role as financial planners is developing a strategy, not just picking investments. So, we make sure that, we're developing a risk tolerance, or communicating a risk tolerance with clients that they're comfortable with whatever level of volatility in the market, that they're participating in as far as what uh, how much exposure they have to stocks, and then that they have an emergency fund for cash investments, so that when we have volatility in the market, they know that they don't have to dip into that in the next few months, that they
Yeah.
have money set aside. And I think that all that's important because then they can focus on, we've experienced volatility like this in the past. We know we have good, fundamentally strong companies. We meet with our clients routinely and get a gauge of how comfortable they are with the investments we hold and make adjustments. We're making adjustments, throughout the year. So, when times like this happen, it's not fun for anybody, but I think we're positioned well to weather it out.
Yeah, personal finance is truly personal. So it's
It
what
is.
for what works for one person may not work for the other person. It's really about trust and truth. So
Yep, and you got to plan your work. You got to work your plan, and then especially if it's the markets, you got to be stoic and not try to be a day trader and leave it to experts like yourself. So listen, Maggie, we're gonna take a quick break. We'll be right back. More with Maggi Keating in just a second. Welcome back to Word Money. We're joined by Maggi Keating. Maggie, before we took the break, we were talking about obviously, planning your work, working your plan. We talked about Social Security earlier, and Social Security, for people who forget, it was the most effective anti-poverty initiative in American history, right? But that's the baseline of taking care of folks. We talked about 401ks, et cetera. How do you counsel young troopers, young military families, right? That may be transitioning out, may still be in, and every year is about 200,000 that transition out of active service. How they could better leverage things like the GI Bill, the VA home loans. What are some of those strategies you might give to them?
Well, I mean, I think they definitely have to take advantage of all of that. The VA home loan is great because it really allows them to get in a home without having to save as much of a down payment. So it gives them a lot more flexibility than their private sector peer. The GI Bill will allow them to increase their skill set in a very cost effective way. So all of those they need to be taking advantage of. One of the most important things I think that they need to do is realize their biggest asset is time, as far as saving, investing, participating in whatever money they can save. I know a lot of times money's really tight, but whatever money they can put aside for the long term investments is a great strategy for them as well. Just because even the fact that they don't have to put as substantial of a down payment down doesn't mean, as we all know, that there's expenses that don't come along with owning a home. That they need to be prepared for. So I think it's looking at their financial situation and making sure that they're prepared, with all the traditional things we have to worry about, the emergency fund, but leveraging those additional benefits that they've earned with their service is definitely something we discuss.
yeah, it's interesting. I bought my house on a VA loan, and one of the things that I was warned is that it's not going to be an easy process. Or like, hey, like I'm not sure that the sellers are going to want to sell you a house if you're using the VA home loan. I found that to be completely the inaccurate story based on a misconception of things that was like 20 or 30 years past. So I think it's really important to know not only how you can use the VA home loan for your personal residence, but how you can use it as a wealth generation tool. Can you talk a little
It
bit more
is.
about how you can leverage
It,
those things?
well, one of the things that I think is really interesting in some cases, the VA loan is assumable. So if you were lucky enough to lock into the mortgage rates a few years ago, um, and are wanting to sell your home, you can potentially have your loan be assumable. So what that would mean is the buyer would need to potentially come up with more money, but then they could, essentially inherit this very low interest rate. And so that's an asset that you can
I'm not sure I've ever heard
utilize
that
to your benefit.
Yeah, I haven't heard. That's the first time I'm hearing that one. So, talk a little bit, if you don't mind talking a little bit. That's the first time I've ever heard that. Would you share a little bit more about that if you can?
Yeah. So, for example, my husband and I saw this condo that was for sale not too far from us, and the mortgage rate on it was 2%.
Oh wow.
And that was assumable. The realtor was trying to discourage everyone from trying to take this because the process was longer. To your point, same information you got, but what you would have to do is come up with the financial difference between what they owed on that loan. So
Mm.
it could be a more substantial down payment, but for someone who's in that position, then to have this loan at a really, really attractive mortgage is something to consider.
Yeah, and obviously 2%, historic low, and homes are one of the greatest generators of someone's private wealth.
That's right.
Yeah. So, how about as far as diversification, right? I try to tell young folks, they're like, oh, I'm going to invest in crypto. It's like, hey, make sure you have some that's pretty aggressive, but there's other things you can do. What are some of the things younger folks should be thinking about?
Right. I think, you're right. The crypto seems to be the draw for the younger people for sure. But I think some of the tried and true investments, and it doesn't have to be something that takes a lot of time or energy. They can utilize passive strategies of index funds that have worked so successfully over the years, like even, as is evidenced in a military retirement fund, the TSP uses index funds. You can use exchange traded funds or mutual funds, but what you want to do is make sure that whatever fund has a low internal fee, and you can get funds that mirror the S&P 500, which is the largest 500 companies in the U.S., and just use a strategy of dollar cost averaging, which essentially means you just put a little bit in at a time. And most of these mutual funds allow you to put in as little as a initial investment of $500 or less, and then you can put subsequent investments of $100. And so if you get in the habit of putting monthly investments in, you're buying more shares when the market's slower and you're buying less when it's higher. But over time, studies have shown that you're getting a better price. And it's just a great disciplined way to get in the market, and you're instantly diversified because you're buying a variety of companies. As I said, the 500 largest U.S. companies.
Yeah, discipline is the habits of the things that we repeatedly do, right? So discipline and habits are the things that we create ourselves around. And what I've heard you consistently say in this conversation is like, even if you don't have any money, or even if you're just starting, get into the habit of saving a little bit of money, trying to figure out how to automate that savings out of it. Because if you're 18, 20, 24, and you're making a little bit of money, hopefully by the time you're 44, you'll be making more of the money. And you're going to be figuring out how over time to save a larger percentage of probably the same percentage of your salary, but a larger percentage of money over time as the first place.
Right, when you're in your higher earning years.
Totally.
But also that, when you're 18, 20, your biggest asset then is time. You have this much longer runway of savings. And studies have shown too that if you're able to start earlier, even if say you started at 20 and stopped at 40, you would probably have more money by the time you're 65 than someone who starts at 40 and puts in more money along the way, just because you are participating in the market for that much longer.
Yeah, it goes to the point of discipline is more important than motivation. When you make a ton of money, you're going to be motivated.
It doesn't work that way.
Exactly.
You got to be disciplined.
It doesn't work that way. I meet too many people that make too much money that have never figured out the discipline habit of just putting money away, and they just continue to spend just the same way they did when they didn't have any money. So it's hard to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that lifestyle elevation. As they make more money, they spend more money.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So Maggie, I know you have two kids. You have a Jack. I have a Jack, and I have a Maggie as well. When you look back at your career, you met your husband. He's in the Marine Corps. You were Radford University. Did you ever think you were going to go into financial planning? Back then, and what was some of the things you look back on with a sense of pride?
I was always interested in the stock market. So the fact that I ended up here was not a surprise to me, but I'm really proud of the more holistic approach through financial planning. I think that's more valuable. Um, I'm really proud of, I'm really serendipity that I met Susan Bolton, who was one of the founders of FBB, and was able to land here because this company has been, being able to become a partner and shareholder in this company, and seeing its growth has been life changing, really. And I've been a privilege to be a part of it.
Yeah. Um, and I love the fact that you talked about, when you were in San Diego and then you were in Oklahoma, et cetera, because as we said earlier, 24% of current military spouses are unemployed. And it breaks my heart because most American families are dual income families. So when you have military families, who are, struggling to get by because, these are spouses, 88%, by the way, are women who are, looking for work
And a lot of
can't
very
find it.
talented spouses.
Right.
All right. So before we let you go, we do a warrior Q&A at the end of a segment. It is.
I'm scared.
It's my. No, I try not to make it scary. It's my favorite question. We've talked a lot about this during this call. Is like, what is the money advice that you know now that you wish you knew when you were younger?
Probably to, buy what you know. I mean, I look at things like when my kids came home and said, everyone's getting Netflix, or, when Tesla first came out, to research it and buy those kind of things, like when, they were becoming the trend. If you look at Apple, I remember I set up a trade and I didn't do it in 1998 to buy Amazon, and we were getting ready to buy a house, so I didn't do it because I read an article about it was every CEO's favorite website. So, like, when you see these little things, pay attention.
What was your favorite part of being a military spouse for almost 30 years?
The camaraderie, for sure. The pride, the camaraderie, it was just a lot of fun to have that common bond, and meeting people, traveling, all of it.
And what was the hardest part about being a military spouse for almost 30 years?
When he was deployed.
And how did you get through those days?
Oh, just a lot of hanging out with friends and
Cultivating
watching
your network and your
HGTV.
friends. There you go.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Well, thank you so much for answering our questions. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, Maggie, thanks for all that you and your family have done. We appreciate you, and thanks for joining us on Warrior Money. All right, that's our show. So listen, subscribe, and review Warrior Money wherever you get your podcast, or find us on Yahoo Finance. I'm Patrick Murphy.
And I'm Dan Kunze. We'll see you again next week.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.